Silence, confusion, emotional pressure. Toxic people rarely reveal themselves in obvious ways at the beginning. Instead, they watch closely. Every reaction becomes information. Every emotional response becomes a weakness to study. A slight insult, a delayed reply, a disrespectful comment disguised as a joke. None of it is accidental. Toxic people test limits before they cross them. Most people never notice this psychological game until they feel emotionally drained, manipulated, or trapped inside relationships that slowly destroy their peace. Strange truth? Intelligence alone does not protect someone from manipulation. Emotional reactions often give toxic people exactly the control they want. Anger feeds them. Defensiveness entertains them. Over-explaining gives them more ways to twist reality. Meanwhile, calm people become difficult to control. That is why emotionally strong individuals often scare manipulators the most. Deep inside, toxic people fear losing access to your emotions because the moment emotional control disappears, their power begins collapsing. Throughout this video, powerful psychological truths behind toxic behavior will be uncovered step by step. Hidden manipulation patterns, silent emotional tests, mind games most people completely miss. More importantly, practical ways to outsmart toxic people without screaming, fighting, or becoming toxic yourself. Some of these signs may even expose behaviors you ignored for years. Stay until the end because the final lesson could completely change the way you deal with difficult people forever. Welcome to Empath Energy, where emotional intelligence becomes your greatest strength. Subscribe now and join a community learning how to protect peace, master self-control, and rise above toxic behavior. Pay close attention to the people who make you feel emotionally exhausted for reasons you cannot fully explain. Toxic people rarely begin with open cruelty. Their first weapon is subtlety. A manipulator almost never walks into someone's life acting dangerous from the start. Instead, they observe quietly. They study reactions. They search for emotional openings the same way a hacker searches for weak passwords. One small disrespect, one guilt trip, one ignored boundary. Then they wait carefully to see your response. That response tells them everything. Some toxic people test how much discomfort you are willing to tolerate just to keep peace. Others test how quickly guilt can control your decisions. A delayed text reply becomes emotional pressure. A simple disagreement suddenly turns into silent treatment. Tiny situations become psychological experiments designed to measure your emotional dependence. And the dangerous part is this behavior often feels normal in the beginning. Manipulation rarely enters loudly. It enters through confusion, through charm, through emotional inconsistency. One day they praise you, the next day they withdraw affection. Your mind begins chasing approval without realizing it. This creates emotional imbalance, and toxic people thrive inside imbalance because confused people are easier to control. Many victims blame themselves during this stage. They believe they are overthinking, too sensitive, too emotional. But deep down, their nervous system already senses something unhealthy happening beneath the surface. Toxic individuals often push limits slowly because gradual disrespect is harder to detect. They want to see whether you will speak up or stay silent, whether you will defend your peace or sacrifice it to avoid conflict. Every tolerated disrespect becomes permission for bigger disrespect later. Every emotional reaction becomes useful information. And once someone realizes they can control your emotions through guilt, fear, or confusion, the testing usually becomes more aggressive over time. Watch carefully how certain people react during small moments. That is usually where toxic behavior quietly reveals itself first. An interruption while you are speaking, a dismissive laugh after you express something meaningful, a sarcastic comment hidden behind the words "just joking," tiny acts, tiny violations, but none of them are meaningless. Toxic people often begin with low-level disrespect because major disrespect would expose them too quickly. They need gradual emotional conditioning. They want your mind to slowly normalize behavior that once felt uncomfortable. The first time they cross a line, your instincts notice it immediately. But then comes the manipulation. They call you too sensitive, too dramatic, too emotional. Suddenly, instead of questioning their behavior, you begin questioning your own feelings. That is the trap. Over time, repeated small disrespect starts reshaping your boundaries without you realizing it. You begin tolerating things you once promised yourself you would never accept. And toxic people pay attention to this shift very closely. Every silence becomes permission. Every nervous laugh becomes acceptance. Every ignored red flag teaches them how far they can go next time. Many emotionally kind people struggle here because they naturally try to understand others. They search for good intentions. They excuse bad behavior to maintain peace. But manipulators often weaponize that empathy. They rely on your patience more than their honesty. This is why emotional reactions become dangerous. Arguing endlessly, defending yourself constantly, or trying to prove your worth usually feeds the cycle instead of ending it. Toxic individuals expect emotional chaos because chaos gives them influence. Calmness removes their leverage. Silence confuses them. Boundaries frustrate them. Healthy people respect limits naturally. Toxic people often react to boundaries with guilt, anger, or emotional punishment because boundaries threaten their control. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is believing toxic individuals will eventually change through enough love, loyalty, or understanding. But manipulators rarely respect someone they can emotionally control too easily. Kind people often enter toxic situations believing honesty, patience, and understanding will fix everything. That belief becomes dangerous when it meets someone who survives through manipulation. Empathetic people naturally over-explain because they want clarity. They try to solve misunderstandings peacefully. They replay conversations in their heads, searching for better words, softer tones, gentler approaches. But toxic individuals often see this emotional effort very differently. They see it as access. The more desperately someone tries to explain themselves, the more emotional control the manipulator gains. Avoiding conflict also becomes a hidden weakness. Good people usually fear hurting others, so they stay silent during disrespectful moments. They tolerate behavior that slowly damages their self-respect because harmony feels safer than confrontation. But silence can unintentionally teach toxic people that boundaries are flexible. Over time, kindness without protection becomes emotional self-abandonment. This is why some of the most caring people end up emotionally exhausted. They give endless chances, endless forgiveness, endless emotional energy. Meanwhile, toxic people often contribute confusion, guilt, and inconsistency in return. One painful truth many people eventually learn is this: being understanding does not guarantee being respected. Manipulators often test emotionally generous people because generous people keep hoping for change. They keep believing the good moments are the real version of the person. But patterns reveal truth more than occasional kindness ever will. Toxic individuals may apologize beautifully, promise change emotionally, or temporarily act caring when they sense they are losing control. Yet the cycle usually returns because the real goal was never emotional connection, it was emotional access. Emotionally intelligent people begin escaping this trap when they stop measuring love by sacrifice alone. Real strength is not endless tolerance. Real strength is recognizing when protecting your peace matters more than protecting someone else's comfort. And strangely, the moment someone becomes calm, emotionally grounded, and harder to manipulate, toxic people often become frustrated because emotional chaos no longer works the way it used to. Emotional reactions are often the fuel toxic people secretly depend on. The louder the reaction, the stronger their sense of control becomes. Anger, panic, desperation, endless defending, these responses give manipulators exactly what they want: proof that they can influence your emotional state. Many toxic individuals are not searching for peace during arguments. They are searching for emotional dominance. That is why conversations with them often feel circular and exhausting. Facts stop mattering. Logic disappears. The real objective becomes keeping you emotionally unstable. Once emotions rise high enough, clear thinking starts fading. People say things they regret. They over-explain. They try harder and harder to prove innocence, loyalty, or good intentions. Meanwhile, the manipulator quietly watches the emotional storm they created. One powerful psychological truth many people overlook is this: emotionally reactive people become easier to predict, and predictable emotions are easier to control. Toxic individuals learn which words trigger guilt, which situations create fear, and which accusations force defensive reactions. Over time, they build emotional buttons specifically designed for you. This is why emotional control becomes a form of invisible armor. Calmness protects clarity. Silence protects dignity. Emotional discipline protects peace. Staying grounded during manipulation does not mean weakness. It means refusing to hand someone the keys to your nervous system. Strong people are not emotionless. They simply understand that not every emotional impulse deserves expression. Toxic individuals often become uncomfortable around emotionally controlled people because manipulation stops producing results. No dramatic reaction, no emotional collapse, no desperate need for approval, just observation, boundaries, and calm detachment. That kind of emotional stability quietly shifts the power dynamic. And one of the biggest signs of growth is realizing that constantly defending yourself rarely changes toxic minds. Some people misunderstand you because confusion benefits them. The more energy spent trying to convince toxic people of your worth, the less energy remains for protecting your own mental peace and emotional freedom. Silence can become one of the most powerful responses a person ever learns. Toxic people often expect emotional explosions because emotional chaos gives them direction. They know how to operate inside confusion, arguments, and emotional instability. But calm silence changes the entire atmosphere. Suddenly, the manipulator loses information. No emotional reaction to study, no anger to feed on, no desperate explanation to twist against you later. Silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty makes controlling people uncomfortable. Many toxic individuals rely heavily on predictability. They expect immediate reactions. They expect emotional chasing. They expect guilt to work instantly. When those patterns suddenly disappear, they often become restless. Some increase pressure. Others become strangely nice again. Some try harder to provoke emotional responses because calmness blocks access to your inner world. This is why emotionally disciplined people often appear intimidating without saying much at all. Their peace cannot be easily disturbed, and toxic individuals notice that quickly. Calmness also removes entertainment. Manipulators often enjoy emotional control more than actual connection. Arguments become stimulation. Drama becomes energy. But a calm person refusing to participate emotionally takes away the reward system toxic people secretly depend on. This does not mean becoming cold or emotionless. It means becoming intentional. Speaking less during manipulation, observing more, refusing to react impulsively just because someone wants access to your emotions. One of the strongest psychological shifts happens when someone realizes they do not need to attend every emotional battle they are invited into. Not every accusation deserves defense. Not every insult deserves response. Not every manipulative comment deserves emotional energy. The moment emotional self-control strengthens, toxic people often start losing their influence naturally. Their usual tactics stop creating the same chaos. And strangely, silence sometimes reveals more truth than confrontation ever could. Because once emotional reactions disappear, manipulative behavior becomes much easier to see clearly. Patterns become obvious, intentions become visible, and people who once seemed powerful suddenly look desperate when emotional control no longer works on you. Boundaries reveal people faster than words ever can. The moment someone calmly says that behavior is not okay with me, hidden intentions often rise straight to the surface. Healthy individuals may not always agree with your limits, but they usually respect them. Toxic people react differently. Boundaries threaten their access, their control, and the emotional influence they worked hard to build. That is why some people suddenly become angry, cold, defensive, or guilt-driven the moment you stop tolerating certain behavior. One simple boundary can expose years of manipulation in seconds. And many people are shocked when the person who claimed to care about them reacts with hostility simply because limits were introduced. This is why the way someone reacts to your boundaries tells you everything. Respectful people adjust, manipulative people punish, some use guilt, some play the victim, others accuse you of changing, becoming selfish, or acting distant. But often, the real issue is not your boundary. The real issue is their loss of emotional control over you. Many empathetic people struggle with boundaries because they fear disappointing others. They confuse self-protection with cruelty. They believe saying no makes them a bad person. But without boundaries, kindness slowly turns into emotional exhaustion. People begin taking more than they give. Peace disappears. Resentment grows quietly inside. And toxic individuals often depend on this cycle because emotionally drained people become easier to manipulate. Strong boundaries are not walls built from hatred. They are filters built from self-respect. They protect mental peace, emotional stability, and personal dignity. Some relationships even become healthier once boundaries appear because real respect finally enters the connection. But toxic people often react badly because boundaries force accountability. Suddenly, emotional games stop working. Silent manipulation loses power. Guilt tactics become visible. And one painful truth many people eventually discover is this: some individuals only liked the version of you that lacked limits. The moment you stop over-sacrificing, they stop feeling comfortable because control no longer comes easily. One of the biggest mistakes emotionally intelligent people make is believing that enough explanation will finally create understanding. Toxic people often take advantage of this instinct immediately. The more you explain yourself, the more material they gain to manipulate, distort, or weaponize later. A simple conversation suddenly turns into an exhausting emotional courtroom where you feel forced to defend your intentions, your feelings, even your character. And strangely, no matter how clearly you speak, the misunderstanding never fully disappears. That is because some toxic individuals are not searching for clarity. They are searching for emotional engagement. Endless defending keeps you emotionally trapped inside their game. Every extra explanation pulls you deeper into confusion, frustration, and self-doubt. This is why controlled communication becomes so powerful. Short answers create less emotional access. Calm responses reduce manipulation opportunities. Emotional detachment protects mental clarity. Sometimes the strongest response is not proving yourself at all. It is recognizing that people committed to misunderstanding you will twist almost anything you say. Many manipulators rely on emotional pressure to force reactions. They interrupt, they provoke, they accuse, they exaggerate situations until you become emotionally overwhelmed. Once emotions rise, clear thinking weakens, and toxic people often regain control of the conversation. But emotionally grounded individuals learn a different approach. They pause before reacting. They stop rushing to defend themselves. They speak carefully instead of emotionally. This kind of self-control changes everything. Suddenly, manipulation loses momentum because emotional chaos no longer exists to feed it. Controlled communication is not about becoming cold or distant. It is about protecting your peace from unnecessary emotional battles. Some people deserve explanations. Others only use explanations to maintain confusion. Emotional maturity means learning the difference, and one quiet sign of personal growth appears when someone no longer feels the need to convince every person of their goodness, loyalty, or worth. Because deep confidence understands something powerful. Truth does not become less real simply because toxic people refuse to accept it. There is something deeply unsettling to a toxic person about someone who stays calm without becoming cold, confident without becoming aggressive, and emotionally steady without needing constant validation. Manipulators often expect emotional extremes because extremes are easier to control. Anger can be provoked. Fear can be pressured. Guilt can be exploited. But calm confidence creates a different kind of presence, one that feels emotionally unavailable to manipulation. And that quiet stability can feel threatening to people who rely on emotional control to maintain power in relationships. Toxic individuals often test emotionally grounded people repeatedly at first. They may provoke, criticize, ignore, or create unnecessary tension just to see whether emotional reactions still exist. But when calmness remains consistent, frustration usually begins appearing on their side instead. That is because people who cannot control your emotions eventually lose influence over your decisions, your peace, and your self-worth. Emotional independence breaks the cycle manipulators depend on. One powerful shift happens when someone stops chasing approval from people who constantly move the emotional goalposts. Suddenly, toxic behavior becomes easier to recognize. You stop shrinking yourself to avoid upsetting others. You stop explaining your worth to people determined not to see it. And most importantly, you stop confusing emotional chaos with emotional connection. Calm energy also changes the way conversations unfold. Toxic people often search for weakness through emotional reactions. They push harder when they sense insecurity, desperation, or fear of abandonment. But emotionally grounded people communicate differently. Their words become slower, their boundaries become clearer, their need for validation becomes smaller. This quiet confidence removes emotional leverage little by little. And strangely, many toxic individuals begin losing interest once manipulation stops producing emotional rewards. Not because they suddenly changed, but because emotional control no longer feels accessible. That is why true confidence is rarely loud. It does not need dominance, revenge, or constant proving. Real confidence simply protects peace without apology, and toxic people often struggle deeply around individuals whose emotional balance cannot be easily disturbed anymore. One of the most painful traps emotionally kind people fall into is the belief that more love, more patience, or more sacrifice will eventually transform a toxic person into someone safe. They keep thinking the next conversation will finally create understanding. The next act of loyalty will finally earn respect. The next emotional sacrifice will finally bring peace. But toxic individuals often exploit this hope without ever truly changing their behavior. Emotional loyalty becomes something they depend on rather than appreciate. They learn that no matter how badly they behave, forgiveness will probably arrive again. And slowly, the relationship stops becoming about mutual care and starts becoming about emotional endurance. Many people trapped in toxic dynamics spend years trying to prove their worth to someone who already decided to keep moving the emotional goalposts. Nothing ever feels enough. More understanding is demanded. More patience is expected. More emotional labor is required. Meanwhile, the person constantly giving begins losing connection with themselves. Their confidence weakens. Their emotional energy drains. Their self-worth becomes tied to receiving approval from someone emotionally unavailable or manipulative. This is the hidden danger of constantly trying to win toxic people over. The focus quietly shifts from protecting your peace to earning permission to feel valued. And manipulators often sense this desperation immediately. The harder someone tries proving loyalty, the easier emotional control becomes. Healthy relationships do not require endless emotional auditions. Real connection does not force someone to constantly earn basic respect, honesty, or kindness. One major sign of healing appears when a person finally understands that love cannot heal someone who benefits from emotional dysfunction. Compassion matters, patience matters, but self-respect matters too. Sometimes the strongest decision is no longer fighting for acceptance from people committed to misunderstanding your value. And strangely, the moment someone stops begging to be appreciated, their emotional clarity begins returning. They start seeing patterns more clearly. They stop confusing emotional struggle with emotional depth. And they finally realize that constantly proving your worth to toxic people often becomes the very thing keeping you emotionally trapped. Emotionally intelligent people learn something that changes the way they see relationships forever. Patterns reveal truth more clearly than promises ever will. Toxic individuals often speak beautifully when they sense consequences approaching. They apologize emotionally. They promise growth. They suddenly become caring, attentive, and understanding for short periods of time. But smart observers pay attention to consistency, not temporary emotional performances. They notice repeated guilt tactics designed to make others feel responsible for someone else's unhealthy behavior. They recognize emotional inconsistency where affection appears only when control feels threatened. They begin seeing fake victimhood more clearly, situations where toxic people twist every conflict into proof that they are the ones being attacked, misunderstood, or mistreated. Selective kindness also becomes easier to recognize. Manipulators are often kind strategically, not consistently. Their kindness appears when they want access, attention, forgiveness, or emotional leverage. And this creates deep confusion for empathetic people because the good moments feel real enough to create hope again. But emotional intelligence is not about becoming paranoid or assuming everyone has bad intentions. It is about learning to observe calmly instead of ignoring repeated warning signs. Healthy people make mistakes too. Healthy people apologize imperfectly. But healthy individuals usually show accountability, respect boundaries, and create emotional safety over time. Toxic people often repeat the same harmful patterns while using words to temporarily cover the damage. Smart people stop becoming hypnotized by potential and start paying attention to behavior. They notice how someone reacts under stress, how they treat people they no longer need, how they respond when boundaries appear, how they behave once emotional control starts slipping away. Observation becomes protection, not coldness, not fear, just awareness. One of the strongest forms of emotional maturity is learning to trust patterns instead of constantly explaining away discomfort. Because deep down, the body often notices manipulation long before the mind fully accepts it, and people who learn to observe quietly without immediately reacting emotionally become far harder for toxic individuals to manipulate, confuse, or emotionally drain over time. One of the most freeing realizations a person can reach is understanding that toxic people do not always need to be defeated, exposed, or emotionally destroyed in order for you to finally heal. Many people stay trapped because they keep fighting for closure, justice, or emotional victory. They replay conversations in their minds. They fantasize about finally saying the perfect words. They wait for toxic people to suddenly admit the damage they caused. But emotional freedom rarely arrives through winning emotional battles. It arrives through detachment, through no longer giving unhealthy people unlimited access to your peace, your energy, and your self-worth. Real power is not controlling others. Real power is controlling your reactions, your boundaries, and your emotional focus. Toxic people often survive through emotional access. They rely on your anger, your guilt, your fear of losing them, or your need to be understood. But the moment emotional self-control grows stronger, something powerful changes internally. Their opinions begin losing weight. Their manipulations become easier to recognize. Their chaos stops feeling personal. Calm detachment is not hatred, it is emotional clarity. It is the quiet decision to stop carrying emotional burdens that were never yours to carry. And strangely, this calm energy often confuses toxic people the most because they are used to emotional control creating predictable reactions. But now the old buttons stop working. The guilt loses power. The emotional games lose intensity. And peace slowly returns to places inside you that were exhausted for far too long. Emotionally mature people eventually stop trying to save relationships that require self-destruction to survive. They stop sacrificing mental peace just to avoid disappointing difficult people. They understand that protecting emotional stability is not selfish, it is necessary. And one of the strongest signs of growth appears when someone can walk away from manipulation without needing revenge, validation, or final approval, because deep inside they finally understand that peace is more valuable than winning emotional wars that never truly end. Toxic people survive by controlling emotions. That is where their real power comes from. The anger they provoke, the guilt they create, the confusion they plant inside your mind. But the moment you stop reacting impulsively, their strategy begins falling apart. Calmness changes the entire game. Silence becomes strength. Boundaries become protection. Self-respect becomes invisible armor that toxic people can no longer easily break through. And one of the most important lessons to remember is this: not every battle deserves your emotions. Some people will never fully understand your value because misunderstanding you benefits their control. That is why emotional self-control matters more than emotional revenge. Peace is not weakness. Walking away from manipulation is not weakness. Refusing to fight every emotional war is not weakness. In many cases, it is the strongest thing a person can do. The goal was never to become cold or heartless. The goal was to protect your peace without losing your kindness. To stay emotionally aware without becoming emotionally controlled. And once that shift happens, toxic people slowly lose the influence they once had over your mind, your confidence, and your life. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Empath Energy, and share this with someone who may need these words today. Sometimes one lesson can completely change the way a person protects their peace forever. And always remember this: the strongest people are not the loudest. They are the ones who remain calm in chaos, protect their energy wisely, and become impossible to emotionally control.